Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to this webinar. My name is Anita Derecskei, and I work in the tutor development team of Preply. I'm a senior tutor development specialist of Preply. And today I'm going to talk to you about how to keep your students after the first lesson. Before I get started, I wanted to tell you a couple of things about Preply. Maybe you have never heard about Preply. Preply is basically an online teaching platform and is the largest community of online teachers worldwide. We have students and tutors from all around the world teaching different subjects. Signing up to be a Preply tutor is quite a quick and easy process. And after your profile gets improved, you have access to over 800,000 students globally from over 180 countries. When you teach on Preply, you can choose your hourly rate and you can change it anytime. You can decide when and how many hours you want to teach, and there is no minimum time commitment or a fixed schedule for you. Besides a smooth class scheduling experience, a smart calendar, our student messaging system, convenient payment methods, we also offer state-of-the-art online classroom, our state-of-the-art online virtual classroom, together with our teaching tools that are available for your classes. We also offer lots of professional development opportunities like free courses, webinars, and other events. My team, the tutor development team, is the one that works on these professional development events. And I can assure you that we provide lots of different opportunities, regardless of whether you're a novice teacher, maybe you have just started off teaching, or maybe you are more experienced. Also, if you become a Preply tutor, you will become a member of our thriving tutors community. So there are lots of reasons why you might sign up to be a Preply tutor. I just wanted to know what Preply is in case you're interested in signing up. But let's talk about today's topic, which is how to keep your students after the first lesson. At Preply, our first lesson with each student is a so-called trial lesson. And whether you teach on our platform or another place, the trial lesson, the first lesson with the student is very important, right? This is the time when you build rapport with your student, you get to know each other, but you're also kind of selling your services. And I know a lot of teachers feel uneasy about this, and they feel like they are not salespeople and they just want to teach. What I want you to understand is that doing a successful first lesson will give you the opportunity to teach lots of students successfully in the long run. So today I will be sharing lots of tips with you that you can use to make your trial lesson or first lesson with a student successful, and it will motivate your student to sign up with classes for you in the long run. So let me tell you what we know, because here at Preply, we do lots of research. We talk to our students, we talk to our tutors. We also have a huge research team, and they are involved in all the projects that we do within Preply. And during the years of our existence, we have gathered lots of insights into what students are looking for. And again, I don't think this applies only to online students or only to people learning on Preply. It seems to me that, because I have lots of experience teaching in other contexts as well, this seems to be quite universal for students. What are some things that they are looking for in their first lesson or their first couple of lessons? So first, of course, what we have found out is that motivation is a key factor when it comes to students signing up with you and staying with you in the long run. We want to find out what they're motivated about, what motivates them, what makes them come back for classes. So motivation is key. And of course, a good tutor, a good teacher can really help you with that. But there is another part of motivation, which is your internal motivation as a student. And we're going to touch upon that today. Also, the students' goals are extremely important. We need to know what their goals are, and we need to make sure that not only do our lessons meet specific goals, but also they meet the whole course meets the students' goals. So there needs to be an overarching goal, something that motivates the students to come back, and the students need to be able to see that over the course of the course they see improvement, and they see that they're getting closer to their goals. And I'm going to give you some tips for that today as well. We also know from our research that students value tutors who plan ahead. There are two factors to this, in my opinion. One is, of course, the effort that the teacher puts into preparing the classes. Many students feel obliged to take classes, feel obliged to do their homework, to prepare their lessons, if they see their tutor putting effort into it. On the other hand, though, it also contributes to the lessons being more professional, more goal-focused, and more specific and relevant for the needs of the students. So what we see on our platform with our teachers is that the teachers who plan ahead, who take the goals of the student, consider their motivation, and they plan series of lessons ahead, and they know exactly where they are heading with the course, seem to have better retention with the students, seem to have better performance, because the students know exactly what they're trying to achieve and how the lessons contribute to these goals. So planning is another important factor. And another thing we have found out in our research is that students really value feedback, and feedback is a key element for them to decide whether they want to stay with a tutor in the long run. So these are the things we're going to focus on today. And we're going to focus on motivation first, because as I said, this is one of the most important elements of why a student quits taking lessons with you or continues to take lessons with you. So of course, we know that motivation is key in language learning in general, and actually in learning any subject in life, motivation is key. But how does motivation relate to you keeping your students after the first lesson? Let me show you some insights that we have gathered over the years. So what are some motivating factors for students? So our students, and I think, again, it applies to students all around the world learning different subjects, they really value tutors who are good at teaching, of course. So qualifications play a huge role. If the tutor knows exactly what they're doing, they give pedagogically sound lessons, but also communication, the way the tutor communicates, the way the teacher interacts with them, whether it's about learning the language, grammar input, vocabulary input, error correction, whether it's about those lighter moments of a class, right? When you build rapport, when you get to know each other, communication is key, and it's a key skill for teachers to work on. They also really value, as I have mentioned, feedback. And feedback is two-sided, and we're going to touch upon that. Of course, getting feedback as a student can be hugely motivating, because if your tutor gives you feedback on things you have worked on, for example, there is a tricky grammar area that you struggled with, but now you're able to use it confidently, and that's already a great feeling, right? But if your tutor gives you feedback on that, that is such a motivating thing that it will really make the student click. They will really help the student decide about whether they want to continue classes with you. Personalization seems to be key for motivation. And I think that kind of goes without saying, right? If the lessons are not too generic, but they're very specific to the students' needs, they will feel that they're more relevant to them, they will benefit more from them, they will be immediately able to see how this applies to their real life. If I can share an example with you here, I'm learning Spanish, and I live in Spain. I'm not from Spain originally, so Spanish is a second language for me. And I have used lots of course books, lots of school courses, academic courses, but what I missed is something really personalized. So I have a dog, and moving to Spain, it was important for me to be able to learn how to talk to the vet, because I have lots of questions about vaccinations, medicine for my dog, and things like that. So I found a tutor on Preply who was able to give me very specific personalized lessons on this. We looked at vocabulary that I will be using with the vet, the kind of questions I would be asking, and specific language for that. This I can never find in any course book. This is something that comes from a teacher only. There are all these like language learning apps out there, but I haven't found one that would fulfill this need for me, just like my teacher did. So this kind of personalization, when you give something to your student that only you can give, is something that really helps the student decide that, yes, I'm going to stick with this teacher and continue classes with them. So one part of motivation comes from the tutor, right? It's the so-called external motivation, the feedback you get, the personalization and all of it. But of course, a huge part of motivation comes from within. So the internal motivation of the students. And what we see through our research is that this closely correlates with progress. So if students feel that they are progressing with their classes, will be much more intrinsically motivated to continue classes with a teacher. And what can you do to make sure that your students feel their progress? One is to have clear goals, and not only long-term goals. We're going to talk about the difference between long-term and short-term goals, but make sure you break it down into so-called SMART goals, like specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound goals. Because these will be the things that the students can kind of tick off and they will feel more progress. Of course, feedback is an important part of this. We've already touched upon that and how you can give feedback. And what they want to be able to see is the results of the class. Ideally, the result of each individual class, but definitely a group of classes should be able to show results. So how can you show the results of the class? What I would suggest you do is to think about how to make learning more tangible. You can think about lesson notes, you can think about vocabulary lists, a kind of student profile, documents, worksheets, anything that becomes a bit more tangible really helps the students see what they're improving. Something that another tutor of mine did was he had a list of my errors. So when we started off our Spanish classes together, he took notes of the kinds of errors I made. And then I took a series of lessons with him. And then after a couple of lessons, around 5-10 lessons, he would bring this list of errors back. And they, of course, came up many times because they chose errors that were quite relevant to my level. And what I could see is that, oh, now I'm not making these mistakes anymore. I'm really improving. And it really helped me make something that is so intangible as, grammar or vocabulary, much more tangible for me. And of course, if students feel more confident, that will help them with their intrinsic motivation as well. So motivation is a key factor. And as you can see, it's connected to the other things we have mentioned, right? So goals, planning, and feedback all tie into motivation. But now I want to touch upon goals because this is where it all starts. If you know what your students' goals are, and if you know exactly what they need help with, it's going to be much easier for you to plan your lessons, but also plan a whole course. But how can we find out what the goals of our students are? So let's talk about discovering our students' goals. So of course, there are many ways we can discover our students' goals. We can think about a needs analysis sheet, a needs analysis series of activities, maybe just a conversation when you ask them about their goals. So the more you can learn about them in different ways, the better. What I like to do with my students, it doesn't work with every student, of course, because not everyone has the time before the first lesson to do so. But what I like to do is to send out a needs analysis sheet. And this includes questions that will really help me plan the course. What are they interested in? Why are they learning the language? What are they trying to achieve? Maybe you can do a bit of visualization as well. Imagine 5 years from now, 5 months from now, 5 weeks from now, different time periods. Think about where you want to be. So let's say in a year's time, where do you want to be in your language learning journey? And then we can break that down into goals. We can break those down into milestones. And these will be the things that will help us plan our lessons, but also to keep track of progress. Um, think about their preferred learning methods, but or even better, ask them about their preferred learning methods. We do know that some students prefer to focus more on grammar, vocabulary. Some really want to make sure that their accuracy is great and they want to be corrected a lot. Um, other students want to focus on fluency because they want to have everyday conversations. All of these things will help you plan your courses if you know this about your student. You can also ask them about the kinds of activities they enjoy. I, for one, really don't like grammar gap fill activities. I don't think they are very useful for me and they are not helping me much. So I expressed this to my tutor and it really helped her plan our lessons together. So preferred learning methods, but also you can talk about how they want to get feedback, how they want to share it, how they want to share their feedback with you, but also how do they want to get feedback and how often. Another important thing is time scale, of course. So all the things that they are trying to achieve, what is the time scale for those? For example, if a student comes to you and they are A1, A2, elementary, pre-intermediate, and they say they want to be C1, C2, advanced or proficient in about a month's time, that is very tricky, right? It's not going to happen. And this is when it is our responsibility to manage their expectations, to help them understand what they can achieve in a given time scale and how you can help with them with that goal. There's an interesting piece of data on the slide that you can see here. So on average, students who do the Preply placement test learn 25% more than those who don't. So if you are teaching students on our platform or anywhere else, it might be a good idea to get them to do a placement test, which can also help with setting goals, right? So the placement test will help you see the baseline for where your students are at the moment. And this will help you with what I mentioned before, managing their expectations, managing what they think they can achieve in a certain amount of time. On Preply, we have our built-in placement tests, but you will find lots of placement tests online that you can use, and they're quite reliable ones if you go for reliable publishers or reliable language teaching institutions. Now, another thing that we do at Preply, and I think can be useful for you regardless of your teaching context, is a so-called needs analysis sheet, which I mentioned before. So this is what it looks like for us. We ask our students what their goal is, how they will use the language at work, for example, what kind of interest. This is one that I'm showing for a business professional, right? So in this case, Julie, our business professional, wants to focus on meetings and presentations in the field of technology and retail, and she wants to focus on her fluency and writing. Another interesting thing we do is we ask the student what they think their level of English is, or whatever language they are learning. And then it's a very interesting thing to compare to the placement test, right? Because sometimes a student might think they're complete beginners. I've had a couple of cases of students saying, I'm a complete beginner, I don't know anything. And then they do the placement test, and it turns out they're not real beginners. They're so-called false beginners, and they do know a couple of things already. So this gives me a good idea of where their self-confidence might be, where they think they might be in their learning journey, and how I will be able to support them. We also try to give lots of tips for our teachers. For example, in this case, if your student is preparing for a language exam, then we give you tips as to how you can help them. Of course, in case of an exam, it's a little different, right? Because instead of a placement test, it might be a good idea to do a so-called diagnostic test, which will give you information about if they were trying to pass the exam today, would they pass? Would they not pass? Which parts are the ones that they will struggle with? So that can be really useful for these kinds of students as well. Then we also need to communicate and manage expectations. We have kind of touched upon that. So make sure you have clear objectives, but objectives that are really attainable, because if they don't achieve them, then they will feel quite demotivated. And this will contribute to your course planning, the way you give feedback, and all of these. So just bear these in mind when you are talking about expectations. And I think it's also a good idea to talk about your expectations towards your student. So an activity that I like to do with my students is a so-called opinion dictation. And I usually do this in the very first lesson or the first couple of lessons. And what I do is I dictate some sentences to my student. For example, I want to be corrected every single time I make a mistake. Or I'm willing to spend 5 hours every day on my homework tasks. And the student has two tasks. One, they have to write down keywords, maximum 3 keywords from the sentence. The other, next to it, they have to put to what extent they agree. You can use smiley faces and sad faces, or you can say 1 means I disagree, 5 means I totally agree, and they have to put a number. But anyway, then their task is to go back, look at the keywords, reconstruct the sentence. So there is a bit of grammar and vocabulary practice there. But the more important part is to think about and explain to you why they have put a certain number to the extent that they agree with. So if the student says, if the sentence was, I'm willing to spend 5 hours every day on my homework, and they say, no, not really. I think I have about half an hour a day or 2 hours a week or whatever. That's great. That's very useful information for you. And you will be able to negotiate and talk about, well, actually, I think if you want to pass this language exam, you will have to spend X amount of time preparing outside of class. So I hope you see what I mean. It's a bit of a discussion between you and your student about what you expect of each other. And it's a so-called, it's kind of like a contract that you sign together, right? So you kind of agree on these things together, and it can really help in the long run with the course. So yeah, we've talked about motivation, we talked about goals, and these two things will both contribute to how you do planning in your classes. So planning is a key factor, of course. Once we have our needs, once we have our long-term goals and short-term goals, then it comes to planning individual lessons, but planning the whole course. So how can you plan a successful course? This is an example again from our needs analysis that I mentioned before, you know, the example of Julie. We know what her English goals are and how she uses English at work. So based on that, we will be able, well, this was conducting needs analysis, but of course we can take this a step further, and we can ask more questions about her needs to really fine tune what we will need to help her with. Then we can set long-term goals together. And I see that a lot with our tutors, that tutors feel like it's their responsibility to set their students' goals. And I couldn't disagree more, because I think this is a collaborative process. The student is the one that needs to come up with their goals, and you're here to facilitate the process, because this is what will lead both of you to long-term motivation. And then, as I said, it's a good idea to break it down into shorter term goals, of course, discuss these with the students and revisit them from time to time, because goals change. People change, life situations change. It might be that they get a new job, they have a new responsibility, maybe they start dating someone and they have to use informal language with that person. So lots of things that might happen to a person that will change their goals. So it's always a good idea to revisit these. And then, of course, using these pieces of information, you can plan your lessons. Here's an example. So I'm going to show you a student. His name is Jamal, and his long-term goal is to communicate more effectively and with more confidence at work. This is quite a typical goal for our business professional students. This we see a lot at Preply. Lots of students are looking for more confidence, especially when it comes to speaking. So what can we do in this case to help Jamal? Well, what I did is I broke it down into smaller, shorter term goals. And through our conversations, I have found out that he often struggles when he doesn't agree with something in a meeting. But he doesn't want to sound rude. and he wants to get his message across. So what he's looking for is language for assertive communication. So I have managed to find out, and this is where a bit of coaching and coaching skills come in handy, is, the reason for him not feeling confident at work comes from the fact that he goes to meetings, he sometimes disagrees with people, but he feels really uneasy because he doesn't know how to express it in a way that is not rude, but still gets the message across. So this is very helpful for me, and it can really help me plan the next couple of lessons. So based on that, we can break it down and see what he needs. He needs phrases for disagreeing, for polite disagreeing. He probably needs to work on his intonation, because very often, especially with English, when someone sounds rude, it might not have to do with the actual words they are saying. It might have to do with their mother tongue, their intonation in general. So, for example, my mother tongue is Hungarian, and the intonation of Hungarian is completely different. It has kind of a falling intonation. We always put the stress on the first syllable, and it sounds a little bit like this. But that can easily sound uninterested, kind of rude when a Hungarian speaker speaks English. So it's a good idea to raise awareness, to practice. There are lots of activities you can do to focus on intonation. And of course, maybe Jamal might need help with nonverbal communication as well. And yeah, we also talked about interrupting people politely, asking for repetition when he hears something in a meeting that he doesn't understand. And then, this can be broken down further. Like, let's say you want to learn 5 phrases for disagreeing by the end of this week, kind of thing. So then you can really set quite tangible goals. So this is what I meant by planning, and this is what I meant by planning being focused on the student's needs. And there's one more thing I wanted to touch upon, which is the 4th, but maybe most important element of keeping your students in the long run, which is feedback. So feedback is super important for students. We know this from the research that we do, but you probably know this anyway from your experience. It's a key way to retain your students. And here at Preply, we use this kind of thinking about this, and I think it's very useful in general to think about feedback and the continuous feedback loop being a 4-step process. So first of all, we align the expectations. This is what I talked about at the beginning of the session, what the student is expecting of you, what you expect of them. And then you can start working together. Then you create the course plan, as we mentioned, which you might have to adapt as the needs change. But then there needs to be feedback, and there needs to be feedback coming from the student. What are they experiencing? How do they like the course so far? How useful they find it? But also from you to them so that they can see their progress. And then you can assess this progress based on that. And then again, you go back to aligning expectations. And it's a never-ending loop, basically. And it's a great way to think about learning. Feedback, the best kind of feedback is quite specific. So for example, if I asked you if you liked the session today, you might say yes, which would be fantastic. That would make me very happy. It's not very actionable though. It won't tell me what exactly you found useful, what resonated with you, what you found relevant for your teaching context. But if I ask you something more specific, like which of the activities did you like in today's lesson? Which tasks did you find difficult? Which ones would you say are most relevant to you? Which ones are not very relevant? What are some things you would change? Would you like to do more error correction? Would you like to focus more on your pronunciation? These specific questions will really help you plan the course. And there are many ways you can do this. So of course, you can think about planning feedback into each lesson, and we'll talk about the difference between ABT and FFP, and not really the difference, but how they collaborate and how they help you. Of course, it's a great idea to include positive reinforcement. You can see an example here of what we do at Preply. Tutors can send these stickers to their students. And not only kids like it, adults really like it too. You can review the lesson objectives at the end of the lesson or at the end of the course and see whether you have achieved them. And you can also use feedback to show progress. And you're probably wondering what this ABT and FFP are. Basically, FFP stands for feedback focused planning. So many tutors think that feedback is something that happens after the lesson or after the activity. Maybe we correct mistakes, we comment on the progress of the student, we praise them. However, I invite you to think about it in a different way. I invite you to think about shifting your mindset and starting planning your feedback as a part of your lesson preparation. So think about the kind of feedback you will want to give at the end of the lesson and plan your lesson based on that. This will help you make your feedback very targeted and relevant. It will also help you manage your time better at the end of the lesson. So by the end of the lesson, I want to be able to give my student feedback on their use of the narrative tenses of English, for example. Then that helps me plan the lesson. That helps me think, what do I need to teach them? What kind of activities do they need to do to be able to do that? And of course, the most important aspect of this is that if you do feedback focused planning, you make your students feel seen and supported because they will receive thoughtful feedback, specific feedback, and they will see that you pay attention to their individual growth. You can use this technique, for example, the glows, grows, and next steps. This is something I like to share with my students. So I would create this little chart and talk about what are some things that you're really glowing, that you're really good at. What are some things that we could grow in, and some areas that we can improve together? And what are the specific next steps we're going to take to achieve that? So this was FFP. And what about ABT? ABT stands for analyze before teaching. That's another thing to think about. The kind of activities that you will be using in your lesson, think about the following questions. What will students already know about this? How much of this will be new information? What will be difficult for them about this? What are some things that they definitely don't know? And how will I deal with this feedback? So this all ties in together with feedback focused planning, right? So think about the kind of things you want your student to achieve by the end of the lesson, by the end of the course, by the end of the week, and think about what they already know for that. And they will help you with that, right? You can ask about this, what will be difficult for them, and how you can help them with feedback. And this can really maximize feedback effectiveness and really help your students in the long run. Right, we're reaching the end of this webinar. I just wanted to highlight another thing about feedback, which I kind of mentioned already, is making sure that the feedback is two-way, but also quite specific. So instead of asking, did you like this lesson? Ask something like, what did you find useful today? Of course, listening actively and adapting, we've kind of touched upon that. And another thing that's important is to make feedback a routine. Feedback is not something that should happen once after the first lesson or after a series of lessons. It's something that should happen regularly. It doesn't have to be quite formal. Sometimes it's just a couple of sentences, a little pat on the back for your student. But bear in mind that this is something that should be part of your regular teaching practice. So again, just to summarize, the 4 things that contribute to your students staying with you and learning with you in the long run, based on our research here at Preply, is motivation, goals, planning, and feedback. And I hope I've managed to give you a couple of tips for these. I hope you found them useful, and I hope I will see you in future events organized by Teach Away. Thank you for being here today. Have a lovely rest of the day.